My name is David Jefferson. I am the founder of Parent Support Arizona, and we're an advocacy agency that provides supports to families across the U.S. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about how do you maximize your experience in the behavioral health system. For many of our children, they have a variety of different needs. So depending on where your family is at, this may or may not be directly applicable. But the one thing I've learned as I've done this work, it always ebbs and flows. There's times where my children are in a really good place and we need minimal services. And then there's times where I feel like I'm so behind because things have escalated and I feel like we need to get help immediately. So today we're going to talk a little bit about that. The other thing we're going to do today is we're going to share a lot of information. Hopefully this information is going to be really relevant for your family. But if not, I have a feeling it may be relevant for people in your circle. One of the things I've also learned is that sometimes I'll hear a presentation or I'll talk to somebody and I'll think that's good information, and then someone will reach out to me on Facebook, or I'll be talking to a friend over coffee and I learn that they're struggling with something that might be connected to what I've learned. So I would just ask that as we go through this presentation today, if there's things you take away, share it. Share it with your friends. It's a small community of parents who walk this path of having children that have exceptionality, and I think that we have to support each other. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Parent Support Arizona. In 2012, I worked in the corporate world. I didn't do any kind of advocacy aside from my own children, but I've been helping families and been connected in my community, and people kept saying, you should do this. You should go and start something that can have a broader impact. And so I started Parent Support Arizona. When I started, I really had three focuses. I wanted to provide direct advocacy support to families. I knew that the different state systems could be really complicated. They were difficult for me to understand and navigate, and so I wanted to be able to be there to help families who were trying to navigate it. I knew I wanted to be able to consolidate resources, because in my journey with my children, who I'll talk about in a minute, sometimes it was really confusing. Somebody would say, you really need to go get your child's speech therapy because they're struggling in this area. Okay, great. And then I would go online and there's like 1,000 speech therapists. And which one made sense for me and based on my child's needs? And then you'd call and some would say, oh, that's not what I do. Others would say, oh, that's what I do, but I don't have any openings. And so I learned that it needed to be simpler for people to access resources. And I don't know what each of your experiences are, but my guess is at least once in your journey, somebody has said to you, we don't have capacity. We can't take your kid at this time. Anybody ever heard that? I was having a conversation with my child's DED worker last week about this same issue. It seems simple. Our children have needs, and the state systems are designed to meet those needs, but sometimes it's not that simple. Sometimes there's a barrier to being able to access those services. So I wanted to be able to have those resources, and I wanted just to be able to support families. I think it's a difficult journey. And as we go through this, I think parenting in and of itself is difficult. I think it's gotten more difficult as time has gone on. Societal norms have changed. I look at how my parents parented. I think they did the best they could with the tools that they had, but the way I parent is pretty different from the way they parented. The way I have to parent my kids is pretty different. I don't know that my kids would react in a positive way to some of the approaches that my parents used, and so it's always this constant learning, and I wanted to be able to support families. I'm a father of 5. My 4 oldest children I adopted through the foster care system, and so I had this desire to want to be involved with children. I did not have a desire to have 5 children. I'm not even sure I had a desire to have children. When I first started my journey, I thought, there's lots of kids that need help. We can help for a little bit, then they can go on and they can either go back with their birth family or they can find permanency. It just didn't work out exactly the way I thought. As my children got older, each of them had needs that were identified. And my oldest son is Grant. Grant is 16 years old. When Grant was born, he was a meth baby, and so we knew that there was going to be some things that we were going to deal with. He also had some health issues that popped up. As he got older, his presentation changed. Eventually, he was diagnosed, he's quite exceptional, so Grant is gifted, but he has some pretty significant ADHD, and that we joke that Grant will one day cure cancer. He will write it down and then he will lose it. He will not remember where he wrote it down, and that is Grant. Morgan in the middle is my oldest daughter. Morgan's also 16. Morgan has muscular dystrophy and cerebral palsy. She is my fighter. Morgan has never seen adversity that she will not overcome. She has never seen an obstacle that she won't work around. Morgan has a variety of needs that are really, really complex though. So there's like a lot of medical stuff going on. Any families in the room that deal with medical stuff? And if you think about parenting and just the challenges that we face, trying to figure out how to meet the needs of our kids, and then you throw in this medical stuff that's even more complicated, because I think as parents we feel pretty helpless because the medical stuff isn't stuff that we can easily address. And so that's a little bit about Morgan. And then Delaney and Avery are twins. And Delaney and Avery are just amazing young ladies. They're both 14. Delaney has OCD, so she has to have things in a certain way. She has a lot of great skills. I think one day she's probably going to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. She's got great leadership. She's very, very aware of everything, but she struggles if things aren't just so. She struggles with changing her routine. She struggles with the unexpected things that pop up. Anybody here have kids who struggle with unexpected changes in routine? And those are some challenges that we faced for a long time, and I know a lot of other families face that. Avery's my youngest daughter. Avery has fetal alcohol syndrome. And fetal alcohol syndrome is a pretty tough one because it really does change the way the brain is developed. And so for Avery, her whole life is one impulsive action on top of another impulsive action. So think about ADHD and then remove all of the filters. So Avery has a thought, Avery acts on that thought. She's an amazing kid though. She has a ton of strength. She does a ton of things that make her just an absolute amazing young lady. And then my youngest is Jackson. And as I mentioned earlier, my 4 oldest children were adopted through foster care. Jackson was biological. Did not know that we were going to have a biological child. That was a surprise for us. Jackson has a lot of great strengths. He also has ADHD, probably the most significant ADHD I've ever experienced, far more so than his siblings. And I do this work. I work with about 350 families a year. His ADHD is probably one of the most significant I've seen. And so for Jackson, he's a really, really bright kid. He struggles a lot with focus. He always catches what's going on, but he really struggles just to sit still, to attend. And so things like school and conforming to norms in the community can sometimes be challenging. I got into this work because my children had various strengths and various struggles as we were moving along through these different state systems. I started out my work doing a lot in the education system, and as my kids got older and we started seeing different behavioral concerns pop up, I figured out pretty quickly I needed to learn about the behavioral health system. I was pretty slow to learn about it though. So as my children turned 5, 6, 8, depending on which kiddo, they started having some struggles, and we had a state worker that we could contact, and so we connected with them, and I said, hey, my kids are really struggling. Maybe we need to get therapy. Maybe we need to get a behavior coach. And pretty consistently I was told that those weren't options for us. That agency didn't have any behavior coaches available. We didn't have therapists. Kids who are under 12 don't really benefit from therapy, and I heard all of those things. Anybody ever heard any of those things as you tried to seek support for your kids? And so I probably did what many of you did. I said, okay, so we'll do it on our own. And so between 2008 and 2014, I spent a small fortune on behavioral health services for my kids. Because we dealt with things like ADHD and anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder. We dealt with some of the trauma. We dealt with those things as a family. And I knew I needed to help my kids, and if the people who I went to at the state told me that they couldn't help, I just did it. And one day I was at a meeting with a client. She had said, hey, can you come to this CFT meeting with my family? And so I said, what's a CFT meeting? Anybody here ever been to a CFT meeting? So a CFT meeting.
Yeah, what is it? CFT?
What's that? So a CFT meeting is a child family team meeting, and it is the cornerstone of the state's behavioral health system. So in the behavioral health system, the thought is that if you get a group of people together who understand the kiddo and who understand the resources, we can match the two. So if there's a need, we can figure out what resources we need to bring to bear to meet the need. I would say a CFT meeting functions in a similar fashion to an IET meeting for the school, where you get a group of folks together. I think the main difference is it's supposed to be a whole lot more collaborative, and some of the barriers that sometimes families run into in the school system aren't supposed to exist in that process. It's supposed to be really straightforward. We identify the team members, we identify the needs, we figure out what's clinically appropriate, and we go and get services. And I sat in this meeting with this family, and sadly I had children in the behavioral health system from 2008 until 2014, and I don't know that I'd ever been to a meeting like this. And as this mom was talking, and she was talking about the array of services that were available, I was shocked. They were giving updates on all these things. There was somebody from the art therapy program there, and they were talking about art therapy, and there was a youth mentor, and they were talking about youth mentoring, and mom had somebody who was assigned as a family support partner. And we're going through this whole process, and I'm walking out of this meeting thinking, who are all these people, and where on earth did you get all these services? Because for my family, we got absolutely no services other than what we went and paid for. And so I asked the mom if I could sit down with her and she could explain to me what on earth just happened. And she walked me through the state behavioral health system in a way that I had never experienced it. She talked about all of these services, many of which I thought were amazing, that were readily available, that I'd never ever heard of. And so in coming out of that, I thought, you know what, this is probably something I need to learn more about. So I probably spent the next 18 months learning everything I could about the state's behavioral health system and private health insurance and community-based resources, and how do we meet those needs. So for many kiddos, they either qualify for access or they qualify for long-term care. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is those state systems, because those state systems are how many families, and especially many families who have children on the autism spectrum, access services. Many of these same services are available through health insurance, and so we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. And then hopefully you'll walk away with a little better understanding of what's out there for your children. Why would somebody need behavioral health services, and what are behavioral health services? And when I hear the term behavioral health, I'll be honest, I didn't really know what it meant. When I first started doing these CFT meetings and I'm talking about behavioral health or mental health, I'm thinking of more extreme examples. I'm thinking of like, okay, mental health, behavioral health, like maybe that's for somebody who's schizophrenic or somebody who has bipolar. And in my mind, there was almost a stigma attached to it. And I started really thinking about, as I was going through this process, trying to understand what it is. And I think behavioral health is this broad term that encompasses a lot of things. And in a nutshell, I think our kids have a lot of things going on. And so some kids just have some behavioral challenges. Maybe they struggle with those changes in routine and how they react to them. Maybe they get frustrated easily. I know for many of the kids that I support, they may not have the communication skills to be able to articulate what's frustrating them at a given time. So they're frustrated, they don't know what to do about it, and so they externalize. They use behavior as their means to communicate. I have a lot of kids on my caseload that have ADHD. I also have a lot of kids that are high anxiety. What we know about kiddos on the autism spectrum, oftentimes anxiety can be comorbid with autism, as can things like ADHD, as can things like depression. So as I look at all of these things, that's what I think of when I think of behavioral health. Now, hopefully, there's nobody in the room who says every one of those things is what I deal with. But along the way in that path with our children, one or two or three of these things may pop up. And maybe at one point you're saying, you know what, my child really is struggling with regulating their emotions. Maybe at another point you're saying, you know what, they do seem depressed. And if you think about some of the challenges our kids face, there's a lot of things that could create depression. Difficulty fitting in, struggles in school, difficulty building and maintaining friendships, perception difficulties, difficulty understanding where people are coming from. So as I think about these pieces, all of these pieces are needs that our children have, and the path for us to go get services really does kind of lead down this path of behavioral health. And when I think about, and I talk to families, most families do the best they can. We work with our kids, we're trying new interventions, we're reading books, we're going to training. Sometimes the need may be greater than what we're going to be able to address on our own. And sometimes there's a benefit in figuring out, are there professionals out there, are there resources out there that might be able to help? So if you've identified that, you know what, your child is struggling, there's some needs that are kind of manifesting and we need to look at them, there's 3 different paths. A 4th path that I didn't put on there might be to do nothing. And sometimes we're exhausted as parents. That is a reality. Sometimes we're like, I'm at my limit, I don't have capacity to do anything else. And so sometimes we wait, and we're just trying to wait it out and see, does it get better? Maybe for other families, that's their experience. That's never been my experience. I've never found that when there was an escalation in our home, it just resolved itself. I'm not that lucky. In my experience, it's always taken some action, some active plan to be able to go out and to try and seek support. So the 3 areas that we're going to talk a little bit about today is private insurance, private pay, and then the services that are provided by the state. And for the state services, we're going to call them Access or Altex. For many families, they fight and fight and fight to try and get qualified for DDD services. Has anybody here ever had that experience where you had to really go out and advocate to try and get your kids services?
Right now.
Absolutely. And it's a complicated process. And I think that it's a circle. I think that everybody wants to support kids. I think that people at DDD want to support kids. I think everybody wants to support kids. Our state doesn't have a lot of money. Our state didn't want to spend a lot of money on services. We don't want higher taxes necessarily, and so it's this circle, and it's really, really hard to figure out how to navigate all that. A lot of those services, though, are available, and so I encourage families to look at that. I also do have a lot of families who will contact me and they'll say, we need to get services for our child or for our grandchild, and maybe they're in a financial circumstance where they're not really even thinking about DDD or Altex. They don't need that. They have the financial resources. Myself, I'm not independently wealthy. I have 5 children, so as you can, expenses come up. And I think for a lot of us, we don't have necessarily the resources to just do everything. And even for those families who are blessed to be in that circumstance where you have the financial resources, I would still encourage you to be looking at these systems. Because what I know is that for children who are identified and who are in that system before they turn 18, they have access to services when they're over 18. And I work with a lot of families, and you know, the reality is we're going to do whatever we can to support our family. We're going to sacrifice, we're going to support our children, we're going to support our family members. But if there are resources that the state can bring to bear for our kids or as a transition for these young adults, I think we should be looking at that. So my encouragement to everybody is, as we talk about this, even if you're that person who says, you know what, we don't use that, you should learn and see where it might fit in. I have families that have wonderful private insurance that they can go and access services. In some ways, though, the behavioral health services available from the state are better than what you're going to find privately, which is a crazy thought, that we can get better services through Access than we can private pay or through our insurance companies. So private insurance companies do have behavioral health benefits. A lot of people struggle to figure that out. Many plans have them segregated, so you might have United Healthcare, and you're looking through your little pamphlet, and there's not really a lot of discussion about behavioral health. And then you have to figure out, oh, wait a minute, there's United Behavioral Health, which is a subset of United, and it's a different policy that's linked to your policy. But most, if not all, major insurance companies have a behavioral health benefit. And if your family is in a situation where you have a child who's struggling with some of those things we talked about earlier, the first call you should probably be making is to your insurance to understand what are your benefits that are available. Couple of downfalls with private insurance. One, it can be really difficult to identify what's covered and what's available. So if you've called your insurance company, and I probably do this about once or twice a month with a family where we'll sit and we're trying to come up with options, and they'll say, let's call your insurance, and we'll sit in conference call and we'll call the insurance. Sometimes it's a maze to figure out what's available. And they say, okay, well, what service do you want? I don't know. Psychiatry. Maybe the kiddo needs to talk to a psychiatrist about medicine. And they send you over a list, and now you have a list of 150 people who are all psychiatrists in the Phoenix metropolitan area, and your eyes are glazing over because this is a big list. And so then you start to call, and what do you hear when you call? Oh, we're not taking new patients.
Right.
Oh, we're no longer accepting that insurance. Yeah, we can get you in. Our first opening is going to be in July. Well, wait a minute, but July, that's like a year from now. And those are the realities that we face sometimes when you go through that process. I think that there's not a lot of information also available about specific services. So when you contact a private insurance company, there's not a lot of people there who are there to help you navigate, who are there to say, okay, well, your child's experiencing this, you could go and look at that. That's not really the conversation. They're really more looking at identifying that clinician that they can connect you to. And then you're really hoping that the clinician that they connected you to has capacity to be able to meet with your family, has knowledge of other resources, and knows how to connect you. So it's a little bit imperfect. I think there's not a lot of information available on the specialists either. So you could look up psychologists and do a Google search right now for psychologists in Phoenix, Arizona. How many results do you think are going to come up?
Thousands.
Thousands. And as you do that search and you think about psychologists in Phoenix, Arizona, are all psychologists the same? And as I've learned with my children, I have children that are really all different levels. So some of my children have a cognitive profile that is lower. And a psychologist may or may not be able to connect. I went to psychologists with my children and we sat in there and I thought, oh my gosh, this was like the worst fit ever, because they weren't a good fit, because they weren't able to modify their approach to be at the level that my child needed. And so I think that's another reality. I also think that there are limited services. By limited services, that may mean that services aren't readily presented to you that are available. It also may mean that some of the services that you would want for your child, the insurance company may or may not contract with somebody who provides those services. I can remember sitting in meetings and with my case manager when I found out what a CFT was, and I said, okay, I just need to know what's available. Seems like a really straightforward question. My child is struggling. What's available? Like, what are my options out there? If this was a menu, what would be on the menu? And my case manager looked at me and said, well, what would you like? I don't know what I would like. I would like my child to stop tantruming. I would like our home to have harmony. I would like to raise my voice less. Like, those are the things I'm thinking in my head. So give me an indication of what's out there. And we walked in this circle for the better part of 40 minutes. I would say, tell me what's out there. And they would say, tell me what you're looking for. If you tell me what you're looking for, I can tell you if we can get it. It was insane. Has anybody ever had a similar circular experience?
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's one of the challenges in the systems. And it doesn't really matter to me if it's the school system, if it's DDB, if it's behavioral health. It's almost like a scavenger hunt, where you have some clues. Maybe you were on a Facebook page and somebody mentioned something and you wrote it down because you're like, that sounds cool because they said it helped their kid. And then you're trying to figure out how to find it. And you're looking underneath the couch, you're making all these calls, and we can't really pinpoint where it is. But I think that is a reality. And then I think the other challenge that you face with private insurance is there's not really a plan for case management. So I work with families that have a variety of different needs. So if I have a child who is hospitalized or in a residential setting because their behavioral health was in crisis, I can get a little bit of case management when they get discharged, because the insurance company is a little worried at this point because they just expended $20, $50, $100,000 on services. So for that kid who was absolutely in crisis, we can get a little bit of case management. What if that's not your circumstance? What if your circumstance is your kid is really depressed and you can't get him out of bed? What if your circumstance is your kid flies off the handle and you're just not sure how to support him and you're losing sleep at night because you can't seem to figure out how to get them what they need? There's not really a plan with most private insurance companies on how to case manage. And it puts you at a disadvantage, and it makes it really, really hard. Show of hands, who would do anything they could to support their child? We all would. And I talk to parents every day. The problem isn't a lack of desire to support our kids. Somebody's got to tell us how to do that. And I think that's, for me, why I do this, because I was so fortunate when we started our journey and our kids were really struggling, and I was like, frankly, like thinking I was going to lose my mind because I couldn't solve the problem, because I'm a problem solver. So I couldn't solve the problem. I couldn't figure it out. And it was so stressful. And I kept looking and I kept trying to find. So for me, I'm passionate about sharing this information because I want you to know that there are some solutions out there. Now, private pay services are another option. We talked a little bit about private insurance. One thing I didn't mention about private insurance that is a barrier, a lot of people don't want to deal with insurance companies. And that's probably a barrier on the private side and on the public side. Nobody really has warm and fuzzy experiences when they think about the insurance process. If you've ever had a claim that they denied or had to get prior authorization, nobody's like, I had the best conversation with my health plan. They said I needed this prior authorization for this procedure. They were so great. They made it so easy for me. Why didn't I do this earlier? Because that's not the way it works. It's tough. Like you're having to justify every single thing you're doing. When you think about private pay services, one of the barriers, one of the blessings for private pay services, you can find a lot of providers that are willing to take your money. But I think some of the same challenges exist. One, services are costly. I don't know what the average going rate is for a psychologist to sit down with your child and work with them. My guess is in the Phoenix metro area, probably somewhere between $125 and $175 an hour. So if you have a child that's in crisis and you're needing to get counseling services for them, and maybe you talk to somebody at work and they said, Dr. So-and-so is just amazing, and you said, okay, I'm going to go out and seek out their services, that's a pretty big commitment. That's a lot of money that you're going to expend. Now, if they're a great clinician and it works, then it's worth every penny. But sometimes we don't really know how that's going to work out, and we're not really sure where it's going to go. The other thing is, you still have no case management. You still don't know what's available. The good clinicians will know other people who are out there. They might say, hey, based on where your child is at today, we need to connect you with this other person or this other system, which can be good. But most of the people they connect with are probably also going to be people who are private pay. So now we have this therapist and our child's making progress, and we're so blessed because our home is de-escalating a little bit. We can start to breathe again. We can enjoy family dinners or whatever those traditions you have are. So things are good, and we're spending about $600, $800 a month. And now there's this recommendation that we go loop in this other person who's also going to be $600 or $800 a month. And now meanwhile, we're trying to figure out, we got to pay rent. I'd like to retire at some point. We used to vacation back before we had no money. So all those things really do get a lot more complicated. So I'm a big fan and a big proponent of really looking at how do we leverage the state's behavioral health system. I will tell you that the behavioral health system available to the state, it has case management available. There are multiple agencies who do the case management, so you can work to find an agency that's a good fit that reflects kind of your family's focus and your family's values. I think there are covered services guides available, so when we go through that scavenger hunt of trying to figure out what services are available, and we're going to talk a lot about services today that you might be interested in pursuing, I think it's a little easy. And the services don't cost you anything. And so if you're meeting with a counselor and your child is making progress, but there's an indication that there's this other thing that's needed, we're not saying you have to choose between paying your rent this month and getting the service your child needs. Being able to go out of town and being able to get this service because those services are provided at no cost. Now, I'm not going to go a lot into the process to get qualified for DDD. That's its own complicated discussion, and I know earlier some families said that they're in the middle of that now. My contact information is here, so if you have questions about that process or that's something you've been dealing with, I talk to a lot of families about that because that is a often emotion-evoking process. Where families don't always find that an easy thing to do, but I'm glad to talk to you a little bit about that. So, a couple of things about navigating the state behavioral health system. Arizona has a reputation for many things. Being amazing at services is not a reputation Arizona's earned. But I would tell you, I've done this work for a while. The children's behavioral health system in our state is actually pretty good. When I look at the array of services that are available, how we access those services, it's not bad. It's not bad at all. Now, October 1st, a lot of things changed. Prior to October 1st, Arizona operated on a behavioral health authority, a model where there was a regional behavior. I thought, this is a kid, the kid has a need, pay for your children you will find that more stuff is available. You will find that you have greater access to services. I'll meet with families on a regular basis who will say, yeah, we had a case management agency. It was awful. They didn't do anything. I attended CFTs. We didn't get anything accomplished. We needed a service, and we were told we were on a wait list. And we never did get behavior coaching. I had families who would wait a year to get an FBA because their child had behavioral difficulties. Has anybody here ever experienced a long wait to access a service? Mm-hmm. So we have some families who have. And so I'll have families who will tell me that, and I'll look at them and I'll say, my average wait to get somebody behavior coaching is 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. My average wait to get somebody an FBA, depending on the time of year, is 3 to 4 weeks. And they look at me like I'm crazy. And then we'll go into a CFT meeting and we'll work through the process, and then 3 weeks later, a behavior coach is assigning their child. They may not have known how to advocate, and frankly, even their case manager might not have known how to go out and get them the services. Even though it was a great person who had the best of intentions, they may not have known how to execute. So as you advocate for your kids, I think you're going to start to see more things fall into place. And the more you understand the process, I think the easier it's going to be. I think these systems are all convoluted. The greater your understanding, the easier it will be for you to go and to say, what about this? And I've sat in many meetings where I've suggested services for children, and I've had case managers look at me and say, what's that? Well, what's a youth mentor? What's a behavior coach? Do you mean this? Well, art therapy. There's all of these different things that are out there, and so the more you learn and the more you advocate, the easier it's going to be to access them. So our kids come from a lot of different angles. They have a lot of different strengths and a lot of different challenges. Difficulty inhibiting behavior. And I have a pretty fair number of families who that's the challenge that they face. Their child will get frustrated, isn't really sure what to do, and they'll react. Or they're just impulsive. Anybody ever experienced that? And that can be a tough one, because in our minds we're thinking, I just gotta talk to them, I gotta explain it to them. And we've all probably went down that ineffective road. I can remember sitting down with my children and saying, like, look, like, you keep getting in trouble at school. Here's what I need you to do. I need you to not do these 3 things. Can you commit to me you're not? Yes, Dad. And then the next day, we did the same thing. And then I had the same conversation again. And then eventually I got to this point where I was like, I think I've asked my child to commit to improving their behavior like 15 times. And 15 times they've said they did, and then 15 times they didn't. And so I think sometimes those behavioral challenges require more than what we were equipped to do as parents. Sometimes those behavioral challenges require some different interventions. Sometimes they require people with a higher level of training to drill a little deeper to figure out what's at the heart of those behavioral difficulties and how do we present the information in a way that might connect with our children a little differently. I also will say that, in my house I have teenagers, and so now we've entered those fun years where anger and mood swings are a part of our everyday life. And I think many families identify with that. And that can be typical, I think, for teenagers, but I think it can be amplified for children who have some type of exceptionality. Because all of a sudden they have these hormones and these feelings and these mood swings, but I also have this other piece that's another barrier on top of that. And so my reaction might even be more exaggerated or more intense. I also know that for some of our children, their perspective may be different. So maybe we need to work on perspective taking. They may not read situations in the same way they unfold. So a situation happens and their view of what occurred is maybe different from how we would perceive it. And so not only are we dealing with, we have this behavior, we have this swing, but that swing is amplified because they misread what was going on. I would also say that as our kids get older, I work with a lot of families that deal with either refusal behavior or kids who isolate themselves. And for my kiddos that I work with on the spectrum, when they hit about that middle school age, I have a lot of families that struggle because their children now are old enough that some of those differences are manifesting and becoming more prominent. And depending on a huge variety of factors, their skill level, their abilities, their school, their social outlets, all of those things, some of those kids end up isolating because they're not really connected. And the adage is that you've seen one child on the autism spectrum, you've met one child on the autism spectrum. I truly believe that. I work with a lot of families, but I can't tell you I have 2 kids that have the exact same presentation of hundreds of kids. They're all very, very different. But I know that in the long run, if we don't work through some of these challenges, it's going to be harder for our kids to function in the community. If I isolate, it's going to be hard for me to go to most high schools and colleges because the focus these days is group collaboration. If I don't readily work with people, and that's not my preference, in the past we might have said, oh, they're an introvert. And that might have been okay. But if now, to progress your education, you're asked to work collaboratively in a group of people who you may never have met or you may have nothing in common with, you have to figure that out because your professor, when you're in college, doesn't much care if you're an introvert or an extrovert. They've made the assignment, you're going to work with these 3 people to give me this output, and your ability to pass the class is dependent on it. So some of these challenges I think we do have to look at. I also think there are some behavioral health, mental health conditions, and I think this is a tough one for many families. I know for me, when my son was diagnosed with ADHD, I wasn't really sure what to make of it. To be honest with you, I don't know that I really believed ADHD was a thing. As I sit here now, I recognize I probably had ADHD when I was young. I got in a whole lot of trouble. I got corrected a lot because I never was paying attention. I was inattentive. I was out of my seat, always, always, always. So sometimes it's really difficult as we get some of these things showing up. Sometimes we identify things in our kids. We might see that they seem a little depressed. We don't necessarily want to label that. We don't want to call it depression, so we're going to say they're down. But I think as parents, we have to be watching because if we're down ourselves for a period of time and we have trouble snapping back, we know that can affect us. It can affect relationships. It can affect our ability to deliver what we need to deliver at work. Why would it be different for our kids? And so I think as you start to see any of these types of things that are popping up, it may be important for you to start to dig a little deeper. Now, I also work with a pretty good population of families that have adoptive children or foster children. I mentioned earlier that's kind of where my journey started. And there's a whole nother subset of challenges that come from those experiences that kids have had. I also work with a fair number of kids that have a trauma background from a variety of different things that they've experienced. And again, that can bring some other complexity. But if you see any of these things that are emerging, my encouragement to you is to look a little deeper. Best case scenario, you go down that road and the professionals say, I don't see it. That'd be a best case scenario. I would love for all of us to have those conversations. But if that's not what we experience, knowledge is power. We'll do anything for our kids, but we need someone to give us guidance on what that anything is. And I think going down this is a way to go. Statistics say 1 in 4 people has a mental health concern. It's a pretty big number. And I think that for us, we just need to figure out where to go with it. Now, I will also tell you, and I have a lot of conversation with families, exploring what's going on with our kids does not translate to medicating our kids. So for some families, based on their family value system, they say, I don't want my kid on medicine. Why do I need to know if my kid had ADHD? If he had ADHD, I'm not putting my child on medicine. Totally a family decision. That's something you have to decide on what works for your family. I'm a big advocate of, though, let's go figure out what's going on so at least you can make informed decisions. If I know a kiddo has ADHD, I can be more aware and cognizant of how we approach different things that might come up. I can have a little more understanding or empathy if they're inattentive. If I don't know, it's harder. And if I'm going to talk to a teacher for my child, and I can share with my teacher, here's what my child's struggles are, and here's what their strengths are, they can get a better picture and hopefully more effectively meet my child's needs.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you give an example of how anxiety typically shows up in younger kids?
Sure. I think it's a good question. So I'm going to preface this by saying that I am not a psychologist, so I would defer to the experts any day of the week. In my experience, it's a fine line. So we'll have many of our children who struggle with change. They don't like things that are different. They like their routines. Anybody have one of those kids at home? I got quite a few of them, absolutely. So that can be typical. Even in neurotypical kids, that can be typical. For our kids on the spectrum, I think that is commonly seen, that difficulty with those changes in routine. Where I think we get a little bit more intense is where now I'm worried that there might be a change in routine.
where things always have to be
What's going to happen if I go to
order.
school tomorrow? Is the bus going to come? Is the bus going to be here on time? Is my teacher going to be at school? Is somebody going to be sitting in my seat? Am I going to have my regular seat? And all of those things that start to worry us, and all of a sudden we see it going from I'm reacting to changes to now I'm starting to anticipate changes or worry that changes might happen. And it goes all the way from mild to severe. I was talking with a mom the other day. She has had some health concerns, and her child now every single day wants to know if she's going to die. So imagine the difficulty that mom faces dealing with health issues, and now every day her child's absolutely convinced she's not going to be there tomorrow. That's that anxiety where it's now getting to a level where it's probably unhealthy, because we also know that that some children on the autism spectrum can perseverate on things. They can get thoughts stuck in their head, and once that thought is there, it's there. If that thought is worry, all of a sudden now that can become debilitating. And so I think that, again, our kids ebb and flow. You learn your kids' ebbs and flows, you learn their routine and kind of where they're coming from. If you start to see those things that seem like they're intense and they're stuck, those are the things I tend to tell families they should hone in on. We know that a characteristic of autism can be atypical behavior. So our children may not present the same way as the neighbor child, or maybe even one of our other children. And that's okay. We work through it, and we figure out how to make our children the most functional they can be and how to help them to be their best. When we start to see these barriers that pop up, we're like, you know what, this is more significant, this is stopping them from functioning, that's when we need to go a little further. Depression would be another one that I'd say would probably be similar. If you think about it, we all have ups and downs. You know, you have an old friend that you haven't seen for long, you learn that they have an illness, and you're like, man, that's tough. But when that mood of unhappiness or just that down affect continues over the course of days or weeks or months, when our child comes home from school and they go to bed and it's 5 o'clock and they don't really care about anything, the things that they used to enjoy, they no longer enjoy. We talk about the family traditions we have, and they're not interested in the family movie night or having ice cream. All of a sudden we're starting to say, wait a minute, something's going on that's different. And I just would encourage us as parents, we live this every day. I know there's been times where, like, in my home, I felt like every day was a rough day, a really rough day, and I'm just trying to, like, little by little keep my head above water. And so we have to try and figure out where those balances are, and also have a reference point so that when we see something that looks even more intense. In my home, there were times when the level of intensity with my children was an 8 or a 9 out of 10 every day. So if 8 or 9 out of 10 is your normal, it's hard to look for fluctuations, but I would find reference points. We had things we did that were part of that routine that my kids needed to be able to function and thrive. And when those things were off, that's when I had to make my note about, wait a minute, she's no longer interested in this, and that's been something she loved for this long, something's different. And that's when I think we have to explore it. I think emotional regulation comes in a lot of different ways also. We have some kids who internalize. So we have some kids who they just shut down. I have a kiddo who, when she's stressed, she shuts down. She's quiet. She's a statue sometimes. She won't answer me. She will just freeze. Other kids go a different direction, and they're very external. So when something's bothering them, they're very external. So they might tantrum. They might throw things, hit, kick, bite, scratch, punch. Some of those more extreme behaviors. Of the two, I think the externalized behaviors probably get more attention. If your child's in the school and they throw the desk, they're probably going to get a lot more focus than if your child's in the school and they put their head down and they just tune everything out. But all of these emotional regulation challenges pop up. Verbal aggression also, and as our kids get older, the presentation changes. So that's another wonderful thing we all have to look forward to. When our kids are young, they have one presentation, and as they get older and they're exposed to different things, their presentation morphs over time. These are the things to watch for. And I put on this list domestic violence, and people kind of think, what does that mean? I have families pretty regularly that report to me that they're being physically accosted by their child. Maybe they're having difficulty keeping themselves and their children safe. I think that I have families who may have siblings and they worry because their child is maybe aggressing towards their siblings. All of these are real world behavioral challenges. All of these challenges also have real world solutions. So I don't just tell you this to paint this picture where you're like, oh my gosh, this guy is depressing me. I'm sitting in this thing and I'm hearing about all these problems. These are all realities. And my hope for you is your family never experiences any of them. That hasn't been my experience. And so for you, I want you to know that if any of these things pop up or any number of other things that aren't listed, there are things you can do and there are resources available. Because sometimes when our child is throwing an extreme tantrum, the people in our lives say, why don't you spank them? What's going on with your parenting? I would never let my kid do that. I remember the first time I was in the grocery store and one of my children was very, very upset. She was not into the grocery store that day, and she picked up a jar of spaghetti sauce and threw it down the aisle. Now, if you've never seen a jar of spaghetti sauce in the fries aisle, let me tell you, it is a sight to see. And I'm mortified, right? Because people are looking at me. Heck, I'm looking at me. My daughter just hucked a jar of spaghetti sauce down the aisle with the fries. So now I'm scooping her up and I'm leaving my cart because we got to get out of the fries because this isn't going good. And her tantrum isn't ending anytime soon. And people are looking at me and I can hear their words in my head to this day. Why did you look at this guy? Who lets their kid do that? Anybody think I could have stopped that?
No.
Was it a parenting issue? Maybe if I would have pulled her aside and would have told her, I'm going to spank you if you throw the spaghetti sauce, that probably would have changed everything.
Yeah.
So the reality is there are a lot of things going on, and wherever your family's at in this process, and any of these things are things you guys have experienced, then there are solutions. I also talk a lot about strained family relationships. We love our children. I love every one of my children. Sometimes it's hard to keep a happy face. If one of my children scratches me or spits on me, I still love them, but I'm going to tell you, it's pretty hard for me to be excited in that very moment. And if my child isn't in a place where they understand what just occurred and why it would be offensive or why it would be hurtful, that's really, really tough. So I talk a lot about strained family relationships, and as I talk with parents, I always encourage them to do a couple of things. One, they have to make time for themselves as an individual. If you don't make time for yourself, it's going to be really hard for you to be effective for your child. And for couples, you got to make time for your relationship. And people say that, and I talk to parents all the time, and like, yeah, like I have time to do that. But I would argue you don't have time not to do it. You know, the divorce rate in our society is 50%. And for parents to have a child with a special need, it's closer to 75%. So if we know that it's already tough to make it through this fun experience we have, this roller coaster of life, we have to think about those strained family relationships. Our children struggle for a lot of different reasons. The number one thing I tend to tell parents that they need to focus on as we start to look for interventions is figure out how do we improve how our child communicates? How do we improve how they convey their wants and their needs? Because so much of what behavior is a way to communicate wants and needs. Sometimes we're doing it appropriately. If I show up and I give you a hug and I have a smile on my face, that's a behavior that's conveying that I'm happy to see you. That's a good behavior, and we're all okay with that. If I throw my dinner plate across the table at you, that's also a behavior that we're probably not excited about, that's conveying something else. I also would say that for families, sometimes in going through this process, we learn that the strategies that we have aren't working. And that was a really tough thing for me in my journey as a parent. I tended to parent when my kids were young like I was parented. And my parents had a very rigid, very direct, here's how it is. Black and white, no gray, this is how it is. And I thought I could parent that way because that's all I knew. And my children, based on their needs, it didn't work. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I thought it should work, it did not work, and so I had to learn new strategies. And so as you think about some of these pieces, if you're seeing that, you know what, my relationship with my child isn't where I would like it to be, for me, I don't like raising my voice. Generally speaking, I want to do my absolute best to be even. When I started realizing that, you know what, I'm raising my voice a lot with my kids. I'm getting frustrated a lot. It's not productive. It's not helpful for me. It's not helpful for them. So sometimes there are tools we can learn and resources we can get that can help us with some of those pieces as well. Our children also sometimes struggle with those peer interactions. And that can be a tough one. Sometimes we don't have kids in our neighborhood or in our community where we live that we can connect our kids with. I work with a lot of kids that have difficulty building and maintaining those relationships. I have some kids where they can make a friend anywhere, but they can't keep them. And then I have other kids that no matter how hard they try, no matter how much they put themselves out there, they can't make those connections. I think that social problem solving skills are also something that many of us may see with our kids, where when there is that conflict, my friend didn't want to play what I wanted to play, I wanted to see them and they didn't want to see me, they didn't want to sit with me at lunch, or whatever those social things are. Sometimes those are really, really limited, really, really difficult for our kids to juggle. So again, these are all areas where there are resources available within the system. So as I mentioned earlier, effective October 1st, Access now has said that we have these health plans, and the health plan is going to be responsible for providing behavioral health support. So we have quite a few health plans available in our county. We have, I think there's 7. Arizona Complete Care, Banner University Health Plan, Care First, Magellan Mercy Care, Stewart Health Choice, United Healthcare, and the American Indian Health Program. If you don't know who your health plan is for your child, if they have Altex, because I frequently talk to parents and I'm like, I don't know, they sent the card, I don't really use that. Take the time to find out, see who it is. The way the system's set up, you can change your health plan once a year. Generally that correlates with the month of your birthday. Because of all these changes, they did a couple of things depending on which subgroup you fall within, but it's important to know, and so I would encourage you to go out and look. Many families, whoever your health plan was, they just transitioned. Some of these health plans are new. Like Magellan is a new health plan to Access effective October 1st. So people may not know who Magellan is. Magellan was around years ago. Magellan was our behavioral health authority. But as far as a medical insurance plan, they're new. Each of these health plans is charged with the same thing. They need to meet your child's needs. Some of them have more experience as it relates to behavioral health. Mercy Care was the regional behavioral health authority. So they've spent the last 5 years of their contract, 5-ish years of their contract, providing behavioral health support to youth in our community. So they have the most established programs, the most provider relationships, because they've been doing it for a while. I think for some of these other health plans, they're working very hard to get up to speed, to bring on capacity, to bring in providers to meet those needs.
Is there a different overall health authority now?
So,
October 1st?
So the Regional Behavioral Health Authority, or the REBA, does stick around. Children who are in the care of DCS, foster children, they continue to receive behavioral health supports through the REBA. Also, some Native American children continue to receive support. For the most part, though, the concept of the behavioral health authority went away, and it is now the health plan that has to step up. These health plans, these 7.
Thank you.
So I have a question. We have all tax, we have behavioral health services, but they're telling us that they don't have capacity to give us the service.
We're going to get there. Hold on to that thought.
Okay.
Hold on to that thought. So there are guiding principles for behavioral health in the children's system in the state of Arizona. How those came to be, years and years and years ago, there was some litigation. And sadly, I wish I could tell you that everything we do is because it's the right thing. Wouldn't that be great? In the best of all worlds, where we say kids have needs, we're going to come up with a plan and we're going to do the right thing because it's the right thing. It doesn't always work out that way. So there was some litigation against the state regarding behavioral health services for kids. As a result, the state adopted these guiding principles for behavioral health. So the first one that I want to key in on, and there's a few more, this is the highlight reel, collaboration with the child and the family. So earlier I mentioned the CFT process is the cornerstone of behavioral health. That's because collaboration with you is a key component of this. So when you go to the doctor because you have pain in your shoulder, your doctor doesn't sit down with you and discuss our different options, and then you say, well, you know, doc, I'd really like to get an MRI, and the doctor says, well, you know, what if we did a CAT scan? And then you guys together come up with a plan. It doesn't work that way. Your doctor says, here's what's going on, here's the test I'm going to order, here's where I want you to go do it. Makes sense. If you go to the dentist and you have you need a root canal, the dentist isn't going to talk with you about the different options. He's not going to say, well, you know, we could do. No, the doctor's going to say you need a root canal. Behavioral health is quite a bit different, though, because we're not talking about a physical ailment. So the cornerstone of it is collaboration with you, your child, if that's appropriate. Services have to be designed to increase functional outcomes. So what's a functional outcome? If right now I go through life and I isolate myself, is that functional for the long run? I'm going to have a hard time working if I never leave my bedroom. My employer's not going to come to the house and say, hey, David, I'm here to pick you up for work. You want to keep sleeping? It's okay. That's fine. We'll come back and try again tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. So it has to be designed to increase functional outcomes. And the service has to be tailored to your child and your family. So it can't be a one-size-fits-all. It can't be, you have depression, you have to go to this group. You have anxiety, you have to use this therapist. It doesn't work that way. Services have to have respect for the child and family's unique cultural heritage. There are different belief systems that we all bring to the table based on our experiences. We can't tell you that your child has to be medicated because they have ADHD. It doesn't work that way. Your family's culture, your heritage, all of those things have to be respected in this process. Services have to promote greater independence. So if we're giving you a service that's making you dependent and making it harder for you to function independently, that's not good for the long run. There are times where we may need to layer in more intensive services, but there always has to be a plan. So we're figuring out how are we promoting greater independence. A good example of that, I'll frequently talk to families who have a child in the school system and their child has behavioral difficulties, and the school says we're going to give them a one-on-one aid. So they started with this one-on-one aid when they were in the 2nd grade, and now they're like in the 7th or 8th grade, and they can't complete a single task without looking over their shoulder to get approval from that person who's standing behind them. It's not functional, because your boss isn't going to come stand behind you and say, okay, yeah, no, yeah, okay, go ahead, hit enter. Okay, good. No, oh, no, it doesn't work that way. So we have to promote that independence. Services have to be provided in the most appropriate setting. So for your child, that might mean your child has high anxiety. Would we make your child go to a therapist in an office if they have tremendous anxiety and don't ever leave the house? That wouldn't make a lot of sense. So for your child, based on their unique need, that might be a more appropriate setting. These services have to have collaboration with others. So we have to have multiple people involved. My experience with CFTs was my case manager would call me. The only behavioral health service I ever got from probably 2008 to maybe 2014, we got meds management and we got respite. So my case manager would call me. She'd call me twice a year. She would say, hey, I'm going to email you these papers and you just sign them. I know you have 4 kids who get services. Just sign one of them and I'll just photocopy it and make believe that we actually did a meeting. And then you'll continue to get your respite. And since that's all I thought they ever did, I was okay with that. Then I learned, wait a minute, we're supposed to collaborate with others? Now I go to meetings and there might be 6 people there. There might be a therapist there, a case manager, there might be somebody who works in some of the special programs that are out there. So now it's not just the case manager who doesn't even directly work with my child, it's my kid's therapist, it's the person at the equine program, it's all of these people talking together about how is my child progressing. What's going to be more effective if we're looking at the big picture or the small picture? The big picture. Services have to be accessible. So we need to have services that your child can access, and services have to be timely. So one of the questions that came up earlier that frequently I hear is, I was told that they don't have capacity or that my child's going on a wait list. Has anybody ever heard that? So we hear that, so what does that mean? That means there's a significant breakdown, because there is no such thing as wait lists. It is against the law to create a wait list for Medicaid services in the state of Arizona. You cannot create a wait list. You cannot say, hey, this kid really, 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 really needs counseling, and we're going to put him on a wait list, and in just, 4 to 6 months, we're going to get him counseling. If timely access to services is what's expected. So what does that mean? Well, most frequently when I hear that there's a wait list or there's no capacity, it means that we're not casting the net very far. So let's say that you get case management from ABC agency, and you met with your team and they said, you know what, we need to do a referral for behavior coaching. I check with our clinical team, we don't have any behavior coaches, so we're gonna have to wait. That tells me that that agency did not put out a call to other agencies to see who else has the capacity to provide behavior coaching. Because believe it or not, there are hundreds of agencies that provide these services. So whether it's counseling, behavior coaching, mentoring, there's agencies out there that provide these services. So here's where I think it gets a little gray. So as parents, we don't know any of that. So what are we used to? We're used to asking for a service and then being told it's not available, and then we just say okay, and then we meet with this person 3 months later and we ask for a service and they say it's not available and we say okay. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is if a service is required for your child, somewhere that needs to be in writing. So whenever you're doing a CFT or behavioral health staffing, there is a service plan that's generated from that. The plan says what we're leading to do, what we're wanting to accomplish. So I would encourage you all to request a copy of that anytime you have a meeting. Just like when you go to the doctor, you walk into the doctor's office, they give you a discharge summary. They're telling you what the next steps are. They wrote it down for you. Hey, you're going to go home, you need to get rest, you need to drink lots of fluid. If your symptoms don't get better in 2 days, you need to come back. We've all seen it. The behavioral health system is not different. There is a discharge summary or a service plan that says, here's what we talked about, here's what we agreed to. So I would encourage you, one, start requesting a copy of that. What you may find is what was typed when you were sitting there in that meeting doesn't in any way reflect what was discussed in the meeting. And that's the perfect opportunity to say that. Hey, just looking at this didn't actually reflect anything we discussed. I requested a copy of my children's service plan. My children at this point were probably 12 when I requested it. My child was 12. And it talked about strategies we use to de-escalate, and one of the strategies was peekaboo. Peekaboo. Now, when my child was 5, that absolutely was a strategy. My child was upset, we would play peekaboo, they completely forget about why they were upset. We weren't still doing that at 12. So that tells me that for 7 years, they didn't update any of the things we talked about, because it still said we play peekaboo. Now, maybe you're into peekaboo. With your 12-year-old, I didn't find that effective anymore. And so it told me that I need to hold them to a standard, and they need to share with me what they're writing. And we need to have that discussion right now. So if you haven't done that, I would encourage you to, before your next meeting, ask them to send you a copy of the current service plan. That way you can take out your highlighter, you can highlight the things that need to be updated. In that service plan, there's a wide variety of things. We talked about your cultural heritage being something they have to respect. So there's a question in there where it asks you about your preferences. So if that's what it's asking, make sure that that reflects where you're at. There's a section that asks you about what's your family vision. What do you want to see for your family? It's a great question. If you're reading it and what it's talking about is years ago and you're in a completely different space as a family, then that's something you can ask them to update. Services have to be timely. So most families don't realize that when they tell you there's a wait list, that's illegal. So first, I'd get a copy of the service plan. Second, I would put your request in writing. So the next thing I'd be doing, I'd be sending an email to your case manager and saying, hey, we did this CFT on this date. You were going to submit a referral for behavior coaching or for an FBA. It's been a week. Can I get an update? You may or may not get an update. I wouldn't give it more than 5 days. 5 business days is about as much time as we have to figure out what we're doing. If we got to a point where we felt like your child needed a functional behavior analysis because their behavior was that escalated, that's something we need to address today, not next month, not next year. So if you've given them that 5 business days and you don't have an answer, then you need to follow up and maybe you need to go to their supervisor. If you're hearing that your child is on a wait list, if you're hearing that there's nobody that has capacity, then you need to call Access. So Access has a process where families can file what's called a quality of care complaint. So if this is the standard that the state has established and this standard is not being followed, then the quality of care your child is receiving is subpar. Now, I'm not one that tells families the first thing you should do is go file a complaint. But if I met with you and you said, my child needs this service, and now I followed up with you in 5 days, and now it's been 10 days, and you still don't have an answer for me, you had your chance to meet my child's needs. And at the end of the day, my child's needs need to be met. So when you call Access and you make that quality of care complaint, Access is then going to reach out to that provider, and lo and behold, they will figure out a way to make that happen. One second. I had a client who had what I would probably characterize as significant behavioral concerns. There was a hospitalization for multiple days at Phoenix Children's, which was doing nothing for him. And the decision the team really had arrived at is that the child needed an out-of-home placement. He needed to be placed in a different setting to be able to progress, because he was no longer in a place where he could be safe. And we waited, and the first week went by where he sat at PCH and nothing was happening, and then the second week. And so we were now on day 16, where this poor kid is in the emergency room at PCH, not getting anything, just there. And so we called Access and we said, hey, here's the concern. This kid's been here for 16 days. They've talked about trying to find an out-of-home placement. It's been like 2 months and nothing's happened. What's the plan? That call was at 11 p.m. We got our first call back from Access at 3 p.m. saying that they had assigned it to somebody. We got the next call at like 7 p.m. saying that that person had went home, but they were still working on it. The next day, the hospital called and said he's going to be discharged at 3, and they threatened the parents, you better come pick him up. If you're not here at 3 to pick him up, even if we didn't do a single thing for him, even if it's still the same issues we had before, we're going to call DCS. So obviously the parents are going to go pick him up. I call Access that morning. They say, look, they've said this kid's being discharged. They opened a group home just for that one kid at 3 in the afternoon. They created a new group home. They had a vendor that had a house. They literally opened a new group home for that one kid within 1 day, while we had taken more than 60 days and they couldn't find a solution for it. Access ultimately has a responsibility for all of these things. So if it's not happening, that's a big issue for Access, and so they will absolutely take extraordinary steps to make sure these things are happening. I'd like to tell you I believe it's because they always want to do the right thing. I have this sneaking suspicion it might be because they were involved in a lawsuit that lasted like 20-something years, and they probably don't want to go back there. There's currently a class action that was certified against the state that last November. There's a lot of scrutiny being placed on what we're doing with kids in behavioral health. So I would say that if you've given your provider that opportunity, then sometimes we do need to file a quality of care complaint. On the Autism Society's website, I do believe there is a link on their website of resources on how to file a quality of care complaint if that's needed. The same thing goes with DDD. So we're talking about behavioral health, but let's say your child needs a physical therapist. My child needs a physical therapist. You know what I was told? We just don't have a physical therapist. We just don't have a physical therapist. I believe they don't. I believe it's because they don't pay them anything. And now to be a physical therapist, that's a doctorate level job now. So you have to have a doctorate to be a physical therapist. So there's not a lot of physical therapists out there. Then pay them more. Because at the end of the day, my child needs a physical therapist. My child has muscular dystrophy and she's not steady on her feet. So we could lament all the reasons why, or we could fix the problem. And if that's what you need to do, if you need to file that quality of care complaint to escalate the situation so that you can get resolution for your child, then sometimes that's what you need to do. Now, how to access support. All you need is coverage under one of the access plans. There's a phone number on the back of your card, you can call it. There are multiple agencies that do case management. Some are better than others. Some have more expertise than others. The two behavioral health agencies that probably are the most specialized in Maricopa County as it relates to autism are Child Family Support Services and Touchstone Behavioral Health. Both of those agencies have spent a lot of time and a lot of energy to really hone in on the needs of children with autism. So if it were me and I needed to look at an agency to provide case management for a child with autism, I would strongly consider one of those two agencies.
What was the name?
Sure, Child Family Support Services, CFSS, and I actually think they have a table downstairs.
Oh yeah, they do. I saw.
And then the other one is Touchstone Behavioral Health. Touchstone Behavioral Health is like on 35th Avenue and maybe Greenway or something like that. CFSS is like on I-10 and Elliott. So it's kind of two opposite sides of the valley. Both of them have a lot of services that are really honed in on children on the autism spectrum.
What's the first one you said?
Child Family Support Services, CFSS.
Okay, so we have Touchstone,
Yep.
and I'm happy with their services.
Yep.
But for counseling, they're telling me that they just don't have the capacity to
So-
see my child every week. They
So-
can maybe do it every other week,
Sure.
but then the therapist, I mean, a
So
lot
one
of them are
So one of the things
students.
that we run into, and I'm just gonna speak candidly, one of the things we run into, if I'm running a behavioral health agency, I'm running ABC Behavioral Health Agency, and I have 100 employees, and I have 350 families, and a family needs services, who do I want to provide the services?
Obviously, your own company.
But the system isn't designed that way. The system is designed that we provide timely access to care. So if my clinician can't provide the service, then I guess I need to do a referral and find a clinician elsewhere that can.
Okay.
And in many situations, when I have families who tell me there's just nobody, it's not that there's nobody, it's that there's nobody in that agency and they're trying to keep everything under their umbrella. Is it a best practice to have everything under one umbrella? Sure. From a coordination of care standpoint, sometimes it does make sense. I'd much rather my case manager could walk across the hall and talk to somebody, but if it's a barrier to your child's unique needs being met, then it's not appropriate, we need to refer it out. And that's probably the conversation. So when I'm in a CFT and we're discussing counseling, we're really trying to quantify the need. And if we've established that the need for this child is to have counseling once a week, that's what we're here to talk about. What's the need? And if that's the need, then that's what they need to provide. Not every other week, every third week, because our person doesn't have this or that. It's based on what the child needs. It's important that you quantify the need, though, because a lot of times we'll go to these meetings and we'll say the kid needs counseling, but there was never a discussion about frequency. Why might a child need counseling more frequently? Maybe they don't hang on to things. Maybe it takes them a long time to build relationships. If I know my child is standoffish and it's going to take 5-6 months to get to know you before they're going to give you anything, then that kid needs to be in sessions more frequently, because for them to access it, they need that repetition. Establish the need, and then you have to insist. And then those are the conversations you have to have in the CFT. Every agency has a little different bent to it. Those are the two agencies that have the most expertise with autism, though. I have probably more clients who are connected with CFSS. Both of them are good agencies, but I would just encourage you, if your agency doesn't seem like they have a lot of expertise in autism, I'd be asking that question. What supports do you have? What programs do you have that are specific to autism? Because if that's your child's needs, I want to be with a place that's going to be able to most effectively meet the need. Yeah.
If your agency is ineffective, how often can you move to a different agency?
Whenever you'd like.
Okay.
All you need to do is see who contracts with your insurance company, and my guess is of those 7 insurance companies, all of the major agencies contract with all of them. And so if you're with ABC and you say that XYZ is going to be a better fit for my family, then you simply close out with one and start with the other. The considerations you need to think about if you're going to switch your medicine, if your child is getting medication through one agency, you need to think about what does the timing of that look like. You don't want to change a week before your next med check, because then your kid might not have their medicine. So you need to be mindful of that. For most of the agencies, the transition process is not a lengthy, months-long process. A lot of the agencies do walk-ins, where you walk in and that's how you do your intake. You bring your child with you and they do it. Some they schedule appointments, but it's pretty seamless. Yeah.
How do you start the initial relationship with one of these? Is it, just walking in the door? Is it via referral from a state agency, or?
Generally speaking, you walk in the door. If your child has an access plan, these are the agencies that provide the service. You call them up and say, my child needs behavioral health services. Here I am. And you're going to come in, they're going to do the intake, they're going to identify what level of need, what level of support, how they might fit the needs that you have, and then you move forward from there.
And
I think I found out from another parent. I don't think my support coordinator mentioned anything about that.
Correct. And how should it work? You're meeting with your DDD support coordinator all the time. They should be the expert. Some of them are amazing and are absolutely experts. Others are not. It just depends on what's going on. So all I can say is share this information with people in your circle, because they need to know this, because for so many of us, our support coordinator doesn't talk about behavioral health services. Who here has heard of ABA? Applied Behavior Analysis, one of the research-based intervention that has demonstrated to be effective for children on the autism spectrum. That's a behavioral health service. These agencies are the people who connect you with that service. But for so many families, they ask and they say, oh, we don't have ABA. You don't have ABA. So for some of these companies, there's an agency called CARD contracts with United Healthcare to provide ABA. There's an agency called AST contracts with United Healthcare. There's the Hope Group contracts with Mercy Care. AZA United contracts with Mercy Care. So great agencies that are really, really top end, well-respected experts in ABA, they contract with these agencies. But you know who never gets that information is parents. So then maybe your child got ABA when they were 5, and then in our infinite wisdom a few years ago, magically we decided at 6 they didn't need ABA anymore, which that's now changed. But so then now your kid hasn't had ABA and you're thinking, man, we're falling backward. This is how you go about that path to get those services started back up, because those services remain appropriate and available to your child. Aligning services, again, the CFT team, including you. Now the service has to be clinically appropriate. So if my child is, 3 years old and I say I want him to do horseback riding lessons, maybe a little gray, might not be appropriate for a 3-year-old. So it needs to be appropriate, the things that we're talking through. Your case manager should be knowledgeable about what's available, but that's not always the case. So if your case manager can't explain to you what's available, then tell them you'd like to get a copy of the covered services manual. There's a manual that says these are the services that are available. Now, what services are available? We have everything from behavioral health day programs, crisis services, health promotion, in extreme cases, residential services. There's a ton of other services too, and I want to talk a little bit about meds management, counseling, trauma therapy for children who have a trauma background, ABA services. Who here has heard of Big Brothers and Big Sisters? How long does it take to get a Big Brother or Big Sister assigned for your child? A year, best case. Because there's such a need. Because so many kids need somebody to connect with them who may not be their parent. Because sometimes we're mom and dad, we're not the people they're going to connect with. Youth mentoring is a service that's available. There are multiple agencies in the Valley that provide that service. I think it's called, youth mentoring would be the unofficial term for it. I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's like life skills building or something like that. But that's where an adult would work with your child on building skills that they need to be functional out in the community. Behavior coaching is another service. Behavior coaching is another one where some agencies say we have behavior coaching, and then they assign their behavior coach, and you're like, what waste of time was that? This person did absolutely nothing. If the behavior coaching is ineffective and not meeting the need, then that's the next conversation with the CFT. We tried your behavior coach, respectfully, that did not meet the need. I'm requesting a referral. I'm requesting a referral for CARD, for AST, for the Hope Group, for AZA United, because we know what they do. Every day, all day, they do autism. They're the experts in it. And if the agency's person wasn't the person who has that ability. Other programs and other supports that I want to mention, there's something called family support. Who here feels like they have all the answers to this stuff? Yeah. Who here feels overwhelmed at times and just doesn't know which way is up? I can remember when things were most intense at our house. There were days where I laid in bed like pro and con lists, getting out of bed today. Like, I gotta feed them. I probably gotta go to work, but on the cons, if I get out of this bed, then I gotta walk out there and I gotta deal with life. And I think sometimes that is a reality of where we are. So family support is a covered service that's available, generally provided by somebody with lived experience, meaning somebody who has lived what you're living. Not somebody who went to school and graduated last year and is going to tell you all the things they learned in class, but someone who has sat there, who has had their share of tears, who has seen their share of struggles, who's on the other side of it now, and then is investing back into families so that when you're like, I just need to talk to somebody. For me, sometimes that's not our closest friends because they don't get it. If you don't have a kid who has needs, I'm sorry, I don't know that you're going to get it. When you live this every day, and if you think about some of the best connections you have to support you, it's people who understand. When you say, here's what happened today, and you're mortified because your child struggled, and this and this and this happened, the people who get it are the people who've lived it. Family support is a service that's available. Not enough people take advantage of it. That could be somebody who's going to come sit with you when your kid's in the hospital because there's a psychiatric hospitalization. That could be somebody who's going to talk through it with you when you feel like I'm going to lose it because this situation happened. That could be somebody who's going to go to the psychiatrist appointment with you because you're really struggling with the relationship with the psychiatrist. You don't feel like you're able to get your voice heard. So family support is a great resource. There's a ton of parent training that's out there. All of these services are free. There's parenting classes, there's classes on how you can improve your communication, and a ton of other things. Equine therapy, there's some really good programs that use horses as a means to build a bridge with the children. There's art therapy programs. There's a ton of therapeutic recreation programs. I have children who do dance programs. I have children who do karate. There's a ton of different programs where they use therapeutic interventions to be able to connect with our kids. If you've ever tried to take a child who had a high level of need and just go put them in some community-based program, you know that doesn't always work. Sometimes that can't be effective. So there are programs that understand that. It's the best kept secrets that nobody's ever told you.
Yeah.
I learned these things and I'm so blessed. I had this parent who's just an amazing lady who invited me to a CFT one day.
Can you say what a CFT is?
Child Family Team Meeting. That's where we get everybody together. Had she not opened my eyes, I would have never known these services are available. And earlier we talked about private insurance. Even with great private insurance, go find equine therapy. Tell me how that goes for you, because you won't. You won't find art therapy. Because private insurance is thinking about conventional methods, and conventional methods are psychologists, psychiatrists, right? That's what they're looking at. These are all out there. They're all established in the behavioral health system. They're already in place, and they're already programs you can access. And there's some really good ones. Yeah.
So, we don't have DD services, so can I tell my insurance they need to pay for these? Or is there some law?
So yes, and I believe Cynthia McCluskey is doing a presentation later today that's going to focus on EPSDT. I think it's today. Look on your agenda, but I know Cynthia is doing one, so there are a lot of things we can nudge them toward. EPSDT is a law that basically says that if a service is needed to ameliorate your child's disability, then it has to be provided. And so absolutely.
It was this morning. It was at 9, yeah.
So if you know Cynthia or if you see Cynthia,
But you can get the handouts.
Incredibly passionate about EPSDT, and I'm 100% sure she will help guide you.
Oh, yeah.
How many of these things are available for our children who become adults?
So that gets more complicated. A lot of these programs are geared around kids. Some of the programs extend past 18. It really depends on what the age is. Now, I know like programs, there's a program like Art Awakenings. So Art Awakenings does art therapy. So they do have programs that extend past. It's somewhat specific based on the age of the participant and what the program offers. Many of these same things we're talking about, though, exist in the adult system. It looks different, though. It gets more and more complicated to navigate the older the kids get.
So, is the family meeting only for people that have All-Text or some type of governmental services, or can you do DDD only and ask for
So
it through the
typically,
support coordinator?
typically it's available through people who are All-Text or Access eligible. I will say though, some of my most effective DDD meetings are when I invite other stakeholders. So let's say you have a private counselor that's seeing your child and you have these other private people. There's absolutely no reason the DDD support coordinator can't call everybody together. I believe you get farther when you have more heads working together, and especially when they're professionals, because then they can play off of each other and talk about, well, here's what this is, how about that?
Okay.
For a lot of families too, I'll tell you, just because you've been denied before or in the process, don't give up. There's a whole nuance to how you get approved for DDD and Altex, but don't give up, because if you persevere through that, it does open doors in the future for your kid.
Is that something you help with?
I'd be glad to talk with anybody about it, because I do work with quite a few families, and that is an obstacle that they face. My contact information is here, so if you call me, I'm glad to guide and give you feedback. Again, wait lists are not permissible under any circumstances. And services have to be provided. And I made this one of my last slides because I really think it's important that you hone in on that. Again, we talked a little bit about family support partners, and those are people who can come alongside you. And I think we've been doing some Q&A. We have about 2 minutes left, and I'm going to stay after, so if anybody has any other questions. Anybody have anything else they want to throw out?
Are waivers illegal for just regular insurance?
I can't speak to that. I think that there's some nuance here because Medicaid services are governed by the government, and the government sets parameters on how services are being provided, and there's accountability that's tied to it. So the state of Arizona is obligated, when they get that money from the federal government, to provide services to meet the need. And so I think it becomes really sketchy if you're getting paid to provide a service, but you're not actually providing it. I don't know that private insurance has the same parameters that are placed on them because they're a private organization. I couldn't tell you for sure.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate everybody coming and participating. My contact information's on there. I do this work because I'm a parent, first and foremost, and I have had my share of struggles along the way. There are some amazing professionals who supported our family. Had they not done that, I don't know where I would be today. I don't know where my kids would be today. So I do this work to help. If you have questions, you're more than welcome to email me. My email address should be on that last page. Reach out, and if there's something we can do. We spend our time navigating education, ED, and behavioral health. We're pretty passionate about it, and I'm glad to help however I can. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.